It all began on the outskirts of a quiet town, where open fields and ranch-style homes stretched across acres of land. Unlike the neatly stacked rows of identical houses governed by a homeowners association, my property stood apart. I had chosen this land precisely because it was free from the petty restrictions and endless rules that HOAs were infamous for. My ranch wasn't just a home, it was my sanctuary. Wide pastures, a big barn, horses grazing under the open sky. This was a freedom I'd worked hard to achieve. But that freedom, as it turned out, made me a target. The trouble started small, the way it always does. A letter showed up in my mailbox, stamped with the HOA's logo. At first, I thought it was a mistake. The letter listed supposed violations, claiming that my fencing didn't match community standards and that the vehicles parked near my barn were unsightly. The thing is, I wasn't a member of their HOA. My property wasn't even within their jurisdiction. I tossed the letter aside, assuming they'd eventually realize their error. Weeks later, a second letter arrived. This one was more aggressive. It threatened fines, legal action, and even liens against my property if I didn't comply. That's when frustration turned into concern. I double-checked my property lines, dug out the deed, and confirmed what I already knew. My ranch was separate, legally outside the HOA's boundaries. They had no authority over me. Still, their letters kept coming, each more intimidating than the last. Then, the situation escalated. One quiet evening, I was in the bar when I saw flashing blue and red lights reflecting off the walls. Police cars had pulled up to my driveway. 2 officers stepped out, acting like they were responding to a serious crime. They said they had received complaints of code violations and illegal use of the property. My jaw dropped. This wasn't just harassment. It was the HOA dragging law enforcement into their baseless crusade. I tried to explain that I wasn't part of their association, but the officers were firm. They claimed they had reports from the HOA board. My land was suddenly being treated like it was under their rule, despite the clear legal evidence that said otherwise. I showed them my deed, the boundary maps, everything proving I was independent. The officers looked uneasy, realizing the HOA had overstepped, but they still warned me that further action could be taken if the complaints continued. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, papers spread out in front of me, anger boiling. It wasn't just about a fence or parked vehicles anymore. This was about principle. An HOA had decided to flex its power where it had none, and they thought I would just roll over. But I wasn't going to be bullied. The more I thought about it, the more determined I became to fight back. I started documenting everything. Copies of the letters, dates of the police visits, even recordings of conversations with the officers. If the HOA wanted a battle, I was going to give them one. What they didn't know was that they had picked the wrong person to mess with, and this was only the beginning. The days after the police visit felt different. Every time I looked out across my land, the freedom I once enjoyed now carried a shadow of unease. I knew the HOA wasn't done, and I was right. Within a week, another letter showed up, this one bolder and more hostile than ever. It accused me of refusing to comply with community regulations and warned that the board would be forced to pursue stronger enforcement measures. They weren't just bluffing anymore. They wanted to make an example out of me. But here's the problem for them. I wasn't under their control, and I was about to roll over. I drove down to the county records office, determined to get hard proof. I requested every map, boundary line, and zoning detail connected to my land. I even spoke to a county clerk who confirmed in black and white. My property sat completely outside the HOA's governing area. Their rules didn't apply to me, not one bit. Armed with this paperwork, I started building my defense. But the HOA board wasn't slowing down. They began sending code inspectors to the edge of my ranch, taking pictures of my barn, my equipment, even the horses. It was harassment dressed up as enforcement. Neighbors told me they'd seen board members holding secret meetings about me, whispering that if I'd cooperate, they'd force the county to take action. Then came the second police visit. This time, the officers weren't as polite. They claimed they'd received multiple reports of illegal construction on my land. I walked them to the barn and showed them everything was properly permitted. Again, I produced my deed, the zoning maps, the paperwork proving I was outside the HOA. The officers backed down eventually, but I could tell they were tired of being dragged into a mess created by power-hungry neighbors. That was when my frustration turned into strategy. I decided if the HOA wanted to play games, I would escalate the right way. Legally, I contacted an attorney, someone who specialized in property disputes and HOA overreach. The moment I laid out the letters, the false police reports, and the boundary documents, he shook his head and laughed. "They don't have a leg to stand on," he told me. "If they keep this up, you could sue them for harassment and abuse of process." That was the turning point. Instead of just offending myself, I began preparing for offense. My lawyer drafted a cease and desist letter, demanding the HOA stop all contact with me immediately. The letter warned that if they continued sending threats or involving law enforcement, I would pursue legal action for damages. Copies were sent to the board, the HOA president, and even the local police department so they knew exactly what was happening. But the board didn't take it well. They were furious. Instead of backing off, they doubled down, spreading rumors around the neighborhood that I was a problem property owner. They told nearby residents that I was refusing to follow community rules, as if I was some kind of outlaw. Some neighbors started looking at me differently, while others quietly admitted they admired that I was standing up to the HOA. The tension reached its peak one Saturday morning. I woke up to find a tow truck creeping down my long driveway, clearly sent to remove one of my old farm vehicles. I stormed outside and blocked the path before the driver could hook anything up. The man shrugged, saying he was just following orders from the HOA. That was the final straw. They weren't just harassing me with letters anymore. They were trying to physically interfere with my property. With my lawyer on speed dial and a mountain of evidence in my favor, I knew the stage was set. The HOA thought they could intimidate me into compliance, but all they had done was build a case against themselves. The next step was clear. I wasn't just going to stop them. I was going to make them regret ever targeting me in the first place. The cease and desist letter had rattled the HOA, but instead of stepping back, they made their biggest mistake yet. They filed a bogus complaint with the county, accusing me of operating an unlicensed business on my land. According to them, the barn and equipment I used for my horses and farm projects were proof I was running a commercial operation. It was a desperate attempt to drag me into legal trouble. But what they didn't realize was that by pushing it this far, they had just given me the chance to strike back in a way they couldn't ignore. My attorney wasted no time. He filed a counterclaim for harassment, slander, and abuse of legal process. All the letters, the police reports, the pictures, even the attempted towing incident were included in the evidence package. We even subpoenaed a county clerk, who confirmed under oath that my property was not, and had never been, under the HOA's jurisdiction. Every single move they made against me was based on lies and intimidation. When the case finally went before a judge, the HOA board showed up in full force. They looked confident at first, smug even, as if their years of bullying homeowners would somehow carry weight in court. But that confidence drained fast once my attorney began presenting the evidence. Letter after letter was read aloud. The police reports were dissected. The boundary maps were projected on a screen, showing in crystal clear lines that my property was outside their control. The judge didn't just frown at their behavior. He scolded them. The courtroom grew tense as the judge declared that the HOA had acted maliciously, abusing their position to harass a property owner they had no authority over. Their attempts to weaponize local law enforcement and county resources were not only unfounded, but potentially criminal. The gavel came down with a ruling that was better than I could have imagined. The HOA was ordered to pay damages for harassment, reimburse all of my legal fees, and issue a formal public apology. The fallout was brutal for them. Word spread quickly through the community that the board had been caught lying and overreaching. Homeowners who once feared the HOA suddenly realized they didn't have to put up with the constant bullying. Several neighbors began organizing petitions to remove the board members who had spearheaded the attack against me. Others quietly thanked me for standing up, admitting they'd been targeted in smaller ways, but never had the means to fight back. As for me, I went back to life on my ranch, this time with peace of mind. The flashing police lights stopped appearing at night. The letters stopped showing up in my mailbox. And every time I saw one of the board members driving past on the main road, they couldn't even look me in the eye. They knew they had lost, not just in court, but in reputation, too. In the end, the HOA learned a lesson they'd never forget. Power has limits, and when you try to extend it beyond what's legal, it can come crashing back down on you. They thought they could bully me into submission, but all they did was build a case that destroyed their credibility. Out on my land, with the horses grazing and the open sky stretching above, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Real freedom again. My ranch was mine. My peace was intact. And the HOA that once thought they could control me was left picking up the pieces of their own arrogance. This time, they regretted every step they took against me.